Toms River High School staff.
I'm Tom Magagi. I'm a senior from high school South.
I'm Chelsea Freeman. I'm a senior from high school North.
I'm Greg Bojangles. I'm a senior from high school East.
I'm Victor Gonzalez. I'm a senior from high school East.
Tonight we have a couple of honored guests. I would like to welcome them. After I say your name, can you please stand? Mr. Mike Jadiniak, Mr. John Ruther, and Mrs. Norma Spice. I would like to also welcome my ASR director, Mrs. Pam Dixon-Coop. And I would also like to welcome all ASR alumni. Can you please stand?
Mrs. Christine Gertain, the director of Toms River South's ASR program.
Mr. Mark Lasinski, statistics mentor from IBM.
Mrs. Barbara Keller, internal review board IRB member. And Dr. Edward Fidel, PhD, the biochemistry major from Georgia Fort College.
Right. I would also like to welcome Mr. Pat Thomas, assistant principal of Toms River East, as well as Mr. Walt Analytics, the director of ASR for Toms River East. You've already met us for the seniors. I'm Greg Bojangles, College East. I would also like to welcome the juniors at Toms River High School East. That is Steve Jones, Teresa Lynn, Jackie Palmerson, Matt Ulrich, and Aaron Walters.
For the sophomores, we have Michael Alexander, Marlon Goodall, Jordan Kovar, and Kelly Smythe.
I would like to now welcome Toms River North ASR students, myself, Chelsea Friedman, juniors, Alex Berger, Mario Tuna, Robert Brooks-Dulo, sophomores, Vincent Del Riccio, Sean Dibany, Sarah Drod, Anthony Finch, Gabriela Bondero, Laura Hernandez, Andrew Yacovino, Ian Klein, Rebecca Lasserson, Shannon Loesch, Neil Marine, Stephanie Moran, Anthony Palmario, Christina Scatarpia, Roma Sharma, Jennifer Warren, and Victoria Wayman.
And we have the students from Toms River High School South. Our seniors are Amber Barton,
Karen Carr,
Elizabeth Dolman,
Tony Area,
Tom Regagi.
Ricky Westwood.
Our juniors are Ethan Henrik,
Kelsey Cole,
Diane Maloney,
Kevin Wayne,
and Jonathan Zig.
and our sophomores are Trevor Bechel.
And Adam Rosen.
All right, and finally, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Patrick Phillips of the U.S. Geological Survey. Mr. Phillips has been with the U.S. Geological Survey for over 20 years and has authored over 40 journal articles and reports on a wide variety of water quality issues. He's received his undergraduate degree at Middlebury College in Vermont and did graduate work at the Johns Hopkins University. And I'd also like to point out he's a big baseball fan, going to City Park tomorrow, and if you want to talk to him about some baseball, he'll probably enjoy that too.
What they also didn't say is I'm a big Red Sox fan. And Bruins fan, yeah. And so I passed up the Bruins game and the Red Sox-Yankees game to be here tonight, so it's important to me too. before I get going too, one of the things I really like about this is, well, first of all, my family has been associated with Toms River since the 1700s. My grandmother was a graduate of Toms River South in 1929. And she recently died. She was a really great guiding light in my life. And one of the things that Albert Einstein said was, if you're a scientist, you should be able to explain your research to your grandmother. So everyone should think about that. Now, the problem is that my grandmother was really tough. And she'd be very skeptical about anything I'd said. So if you guys want to be a little easier on me tonight, that'd be great. But the one thing I can say about Toms River Schools, my nephews went here. My sister works in the school system. My grandmother graduated from Toms River, my father did. I think my nephews are really successful. I have one who works for Johnson & Johnson, and I think he got a really good background in the schools here. And I'm really pleased to see science be so important in a public high school. I went to public high schools. A lot of the great scientists come from public high schools, and in support of teachers, like the good teachers you have and the parents who are here tonight, who help make you become a good scientist, I think. So let's have a round of applause for the teachers and the parents. I'm going to be talking tonight about combined sewer overflows as a source of organic wastewater contaminants to surface water. I've been doing this work for the last couple of years up in Burlington, Vermont. Anyone ever been to Vermont? Everyone goes skiing there, right? You guys get in my way all the time when I'm driving home. But Vermont's a great place to do research. Burlington's a great town. If you ever think about going to a school, UVM is a great school, wonderful town. This is actually a talk that I give on a regular basis. There's only 1 or 2 slides extra that I put in here. And so one of the things that I've seen is that most people can really understand a lot of science. And I think especially this crowd. One of the things I'd like to mention too, there's a lot of people who are involved in the kind of science that I do. It's environmental science, it's going out. And one of the interesting things that I hope you see tonight is that it's not a controlled laboratory setting, okay? Sometimes it's difficult. But a lot of our problems that we have today, be it global warming, be it acidification of oceans, be it a lot of things that we have to deal with society, involve putting together an interdisciplinary team and not having a controlled lab experiment. And this kind of gives you an idea of what we have to do. What are organic wastewater compounds? That's what we're going to be talking about today. These include a lot of poorly understood, highly used compounds. One of the ones we'll talk about is triclosan. Anyone heard of triclosan? A few people have. My sister, because I talk to her about it all the time. But the FDA is thinking of banning it, and one of the things that they're looking at is how it gets into our food chain and into our drinking water. A lot of these organic wastewater compounds are associated with domestic and industrial wastewaters. Some of these include hormones, which are known to be endocrine disruptors. Has anyone heard about endocrine disruption of fish? It's a really big issue because there are some places like the Thames River in England where they started looking in the river, in Jamaica Bay in New York too. They can't find any male fish. All the fish are females. When they dissect the fish, they find that there are male fish that have been feminized. And this is due to the introduction of hormones and other organic wastewater compounds into streams and rivers. So it's kind of a very hot topic, and you get really you get papers in very good journals by working on this, and EPA and FDA are very interested in this. So why are we studying CSOs? Well, CSOs are combined sewer overflows. In a lot of the older places in the country, New York City, Boston, and even in Burlington, Vermont, even though it's a small city, they decided when they made their sewage systems to combine wastewater and storm runoff. It seemed like a good idea at the time. It really wasn't. So what happens is during storms, the combination of storm runoff and sewage totally overwhelms the wastewater treatment plant's ability to remove compounds, so untreated sewage goes into the lake. Our objective here was to see how much of that was going into Lake Champlain. Now, there's very few studies in the United States that have investigated these compounds in CSOs, and very few have included hormones. The neat thing about this for me personally is they study this a lot in France, in Paris, so I'm hoping if I get this published, they're going to say, come on over, Pat. So that's always a nice thing about being a scientist and finding something out. One of the neat things about this too is we had some hypotheses going in. There are some compounds that we thought would be diluted by the rainwater. So you'll see in a second, usually you just have wastewater flowing through the plant. But if you have a storm, all this runoff gets combined and the plant gets overwhelmed. Some compounds will have dilution, but there's also a decrease in the treatment removal efficiency for many of these compounds. Also, we have an increase in concentration for runoff-generated compounds like PAHs. Anyone heard of PAHs? They are in asphalt, they're all over roads. When there's a storm, they get washed into the combined storm overflows. Our analytical methods, and a lot of times I give a talk and people go, wow, you're really a good chemist. And I say, no, but I work with very good chemists. We have a method for looking at estrogens and androgens, hormones in water. We also have a method with our National Water Quality Lab in Denver, Colorado, that looks at wastewater compounds including nonylphenols and octophenols. Now, nonylphenols and octophenols are pretty interesting because they are components of detergents, and they're estrogenic, which means they can act like estrogen if they get into fish or if they get into drinking water. And so they've been implicated in feminization of fish in various places across the country. We also look for caffeine because everyone can kind of understand caffeine, where it comes from. We drink it, it goes down the drain, goes to wastewater treatment plants. But we're also looking at fragrances which have been implicated in thyroid disruption. And I think I saw something on thyroid function there. But some of the things like galaxolide have been implicated as potentially messing up people's thyroid system. And there's a real epidemic of people with thyroid conditions out there now. There's probably several people in the audience. So these are the kinds of things we look for because we want to see what effect they might be having on fish and on human health. Now, I'm not going to talk about those things today, but I'm going to talk about how these things cycle through the environment. This is our USGS hormone method. This is a brand new method. We look for things at the nanogram per liter level, which is very, very small. It's, 1/1000th of a microgram per liter. But these things are known to have an effect, a biological effect at the nanogram per liter level. And so what we did was we have some very good chemists and we used some isotopic dilution methods. If anyone's really interested in chemistry, they can talk about this to me. But we look for a variety of estrogens and androgens in here. We also look at the bottom for bisphenol A, which is one of those things that's also in the news as a potential endocrine disruptor. This is a location of Burlington, Vermont, which is where we did our study. Right up there. It's a really nice area. It's set right next to Lake Champlain. If you've ever been to Lake Champlain, it's pristine. It's very beautiful. Within the city, the interesting thing is there's a wastewater treatment plant there right next to the lake. Now, in the old days, it was really pretty cruddy down there. Nobody wanted to go next to the lake. But they cleaned up the lake. They cleaned up the railroad area there, and now people like to go there. Anyone ever been to Burlington? Right, it's really nice. And so they've also updated the wastewater treatment plant. One of the issues they have is this combined sewer overflow. So what happens is, it rains. Usually the water comes through the plant like this. It comes through to here. It won't overtop this dam. So it goes into a series of places, including a holding tank where they do some primary work, primary treatment where they take anything that floats. And then they do secondary treatment, which is biological. It's an activated sludge plant, which does a great job at removing nutrients and other things. And then that goes out to the lake. But during a storm, so much water comes in, and we'll see a hydrograph in a minute. The system gets overwhelmed. Water comes through here, it can be held here, and they can pump it and treat it a little bit. But if there's enough flow, it goes through this thing called a vortex separator, which takes out a lot of floatables. And then it gets sent out to the lake, about a mile out. If there's enough flow, this dam will be overtopped. And so they don't blow out the whole system. and the water will go out to a gate right next to the wastewater treatment plant. And it's a little unnerving because I've seen people fish here right after a storm, and it's like, hey, you don't want to eat those fish. But one of the good things about this plant is that if you ever go to Lake Champlain, the kayaking is wonderful. There's mountains everywhere, it's beautiful. The last thing you want to do is go out after a storm and see things floating on the surface of the lake that are normally removed. And I'm not going to say what they are, but, well, you can think of it yourself. They found college IDs at times in the plant here. They found money. I think the most they ever found was $50. They clean it up really good before they put it out in circulation, but you want to watch those $50 bills in Burlington. This is what happens. This is pretty neat during a CSO event. The black is a trace of the normal hydrograph. There was 0.7 centimeters of rainfall here. This is June 2008. Finally, the system got overwhelmed. This is the untreated effluent. So what happens is untreated effluent goes out into the lake during these events. And it doesn't really happen all that much. It happens 22 times a year. It only represents about 10% of the flow. But the most interesting thing about the research we did, and I'm going to give away the punchline right now because nobody likes a mystery, these CSOs that occur very infrequently probably put the majority of hormones and many other contaminants into the lake. And this has huge implications for how we deal with our crumbling CSO infrastructure in the country. This is another neat thing. We took 1-hour samples over about a 12-hour period during the storm. And it's a little hard to see, but this is really dark. We shook these things up. What you can see is over the storm period, the initial flush flushes out a lot of sediments that have built up in the sewer pipes. You've probably never met anyone in your life who really cared about sewer treatment plant. There's a lot of money in it, by the way. It's very interesting, and it's going to sound silly, but somebody in this room is going to end up doing that. That's what my teacher told me when I was in high school, and I said he was crazy. He was right. At any rate, and as I tell my friends, my career has really gone down the toilet. See, there was a guy here, he knew it. He started mouthing it. I'm like, great, I lost my audience already. At any rate, the water really changes its character over a flow, over a storm. And that makes it really important to do flow composite sampling. I won't go into it, but you can't just take one sample. You have to take samples over it, over the storm duration, and you have to flow weight them. And I've been talking to a bunch of people, and they said, how did you do that? I said, we had a really good setup. They're like, nobody does that because it's really, really hard, which is why nobody did it. Sometimes the best science is a science that nobody wants to do because it's really, really hard. Of course, sometimes that doesn't work out either. This is really the crux of the paper, and this is the neat thing. What we've done is we've done all the samples that are treated effluents, so they've been treated biologically. They've gone through the plant. All the data for them are shown in yellow. All the samples that are untreated biologically are shown in blue. And so it gives you an idea here of what's going on. We have we measure about 100 compounds. And the worst talk you ever want to go to is a guy who's given a talk like this and he wants to go through every single compound. One of the things you have to do as a scientist is decide what are your index things that you can show people to show them the overall variation. Estriol, which is an estrogen, this has high removal. The plant is very good at removing it. So what we see is in the untreated samples, and this is discharge, so this is the flow coming through the plant. And these are all in log scales. So each one is an order of magnitude here. The most important thing is the concentration coming out of the wastewater treatment plant as flows come through, untreated flows, gets diluted. The concentrations on the treated side increase in concentration, even though what's coming in is diluted. So what's happening here is a couple of different things. There's a dilution, and there's a decrease in the plant's ability to remove these compounds. We see the same thing for estrone, which has a little bit of a moderate removal meaning the amount of compounds, this compound taken out during treatment. Caffeine has very high removal. Caffeine is a great tracer of untreated sewage because if a plant can remove caffeine, generally can remove anything. This plant does a great job at removing caffeine, generally does a good job of removing everything when it can, when there isn't a big storm that flushes all that water through. Finally, galaxolide, which is HHCB, has a low removal. Galaxolide is used in a lot of, as a fragrance in a lot of fabric softeners and things. It's implicated in thyroid disruption. The plant does a poor job of removing it, so the traces here, the trends that we see for both treated and untreated samples look very similar. PAHs are really unusual because their concentration increases during a storm in the untreated, the bypass flow. And that's because it's coming from the streets. It's moving right through the plant. It can't get treated. Normally, if it comes in, we can't really detect it very low. But in this case, it's shooting right through. It's going out into the lake. PAHs are really important because they're implicated in a lot of environmental problems for invertebrates and for fish. I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here, and one of the interesting things about this whole process was you can kind of come up with a conceptual framework that says there's compounds that are well removed, and this is a percent decrease from coming into the plant to going out, up to 99.9% here, probability curve. And so what we've done is we've taken the hormones and we've arrayed them from really well removed, which are the androgens, 11-keto-testosterone, down to ones that are fairly well removed, 17-beta estradiol. These are box plots, by the way. This is a 10th percentile, the 90th percentile, and the median. So this just shows the spread of the data. What we're really seeing here is if you array the compounds, these hormones, from very high removal to relatively low removal, but still about 70%, and you look at the percent of annual load, the amount of mass coming through, for many of our hormones, the untreated flows constitute 50% or more of the mass coming out. What that means is 10% of the flow during the year, this bypass flow, is putting out the vast majority of these compounds. And here's the thing, nobody's monitoring these. None of our scientists do it because it's really hard. We have the good fortune of being able to go in here and do this. So in some cases, that's not the case. Now, the other thing that's interesting here is if we look at caffeine, there's very good removal. Over 60% of the annual load comes from these bypass flows. So this has a lot of implications. What this says is, if you're cleaning up a lake or you're cleaning up a body of water, and you're not considering combined sewer overflows, this bypass flow that only occurs 10% of the year, you're missing the boat on a lot of these compounds. And so we're pretty excited about presenting this because one of the big infrastructure crumblings that's going on in this country is wastewater treatment plants. What this may suggest to people is, hey, if you want to keep these emerging contaminants out of your water supplies and out of your bays, you may want to think about improving your plant to be able to hold back these combined sewer overflows and treat them later, rather than just discharging them to the lake. So in summary, the load source that we see here is a function of flow, the amount of removal, and the source. And these untreated discharges are an important but largely unrecognized source of hormones to coastal and lake waters. And if we can hold and treat these bypass flows, which scientists are beginning to think of, in fact they're doing it in Chicago. They've drilled a big hole, they have a big cabin underneath. During these CSOs, they put it in there and they treat it afterwards. And they're just doing that for nutrient control. But this shows if you're doing it, you can hold back the hormones as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I'm really excited to see everyone's research. You don't become a scientist unless you're interested in science in high school like you guys are now. I remember my chemistry teacher saying, you should really study chemistry. I'm like, no, I don't want to study chemistry. I want to study hydrology. I want to study geomorphology, which none of you guys know about, maybe. But I was like, no, the high school teachers, what the hell do they know? Sorry. What do they know? And the worst thing is that they're right. Luckily, they've never heard it. So, but sometimes your high school teachers can be right. So thank you.